Hello and welcome back to Christie's Cozy Corner. It has been a couple of months since my last video, so before we get started with this video, just want to touch on a few things. So the reason why I haven't uploaded in a couple months, and I did mention this in one of my previous videos and also in the community tab. So basically I moved and it has been a whole ordeal with the whole moving and just a lot of things to get set up in the new place and just so many things to do. So I just had to put down reading and video making for a while I concentrated on this. So that is why. And also I just really haven't had the time to read all that much lately either, so there wasn't that many books for me to talk about. But now that things are a little more settled, not completely yet, but definitely more than before, I want to get back into reading and putting out videos on a regular basis. So fingers crossed that that happens. And one more thing I want to say before we get started with this video is I just want to give a special thank you to Elle from Elliot Brooks. She kindly mentioned me in 2 of her videos, and it just brought so many new people to my channel and subscribing to me that I swear to God, Elle single-handedly brought me to 1,000 subscribers. So thank you so much, Elle. It's so sweet of her to mention me and also invite me to be on some of the discussions that she had on her channel. Like, I've been participating in some of the Cosmere read-along discussions, and it's just been so fun not only talking to her but so many other creators as well. So I'm super grateful and appreciative that I had this opportunity. Okay, so now that all of the kind of housekeeping things have been taken care of, let's talk about all the books I read in October and November. I actually didn't count how many books I read in total, so let's find out right now. Okay, so I actually have 8 things to talk about. So I'll start with 2 books because they're a part of the same series, although I read one in October and one in November. And that is Fool's Errand and Golden Fool by Robin Hobb, the first 2 books of the Tawny Man trilogy, which is part of her overall Realm of the Elderlings series. So because there's probably a lot of new people watching this video, I should probably mention that I am a huge Robin Hobb fan, and this is my second time reading this series, and it's one of my all-time favorite series. Actually, it is my all-time favorite series, like the entire Realm of the Elderlings world. And I reread this because Bethany was hosting a read-along for this series over on her channel, and we also had a few discussions talking about these books as well. So I will link all of those videos down in the description box. However, they are full spoiler discussions, so only watch those if you've already read the series. So I first read this series about it's about 8 years now since I first read The Realm of the Elderlings. And one of the reasons why I wanted to reread this series is because I stopped at the end of this series, so I didn't go on to read the Rainwild Chronicles, and I haven't read the Fitz and the Fool trilogy yet either. And because it's been so long since I read these books, I wanted to give all of the previous books a reread so I can proceed with the series with the story fresh in my head. And the first time I read this one was my favorite trilogy of the series, and it still holds true. As of this moment, I have already finished reading Fool's Fate, but that will be part of my December wrap-up, so I'll only be talking about these 2 books for now. This series is just absolutely incredible, and we're back with Fitz again after his story ended in the first trilogy, Farseer. And it's just so comforting to be with Fitz again, who is one of my all-time favorite characters. And on one hand, it's so great to see them again, but on the other hand, you know that if there's gonna be stories told about them, they're gonna be suffering. So this series was definitely a lot of pain and a lot of emotions. So in general, the Realm of the Elderlings starts off in the first series, the Farseer trilogy, which is about the main character Fitz, who is the bastard son of the king-in-waiting of the 6 duchies, and he's really someone who shouldn't have been born at all. So the pure fact that he exists just threw the entire kingdom into turmoil. And instead of being acknowledged in the line of succession, he is instead brought into the shadows to be trained as as an assassin's apprentice, hence the name of the first book, Assassin's Apprentice. So this trilogy follows the conclusion of the Farseer trilogy, and it's now 15 years later, and Fitz is just living his quiet domestic life in a cottage, and he's just been kind of existing. So the first third of Fool's Errand really just goes through all the day-to-day that Fitz goes through, and really not much happens, but I was perfectly okay with that because Fitz has just suffered so much in his life that he deserves, these peaceful times. And it's funny because we were talking about it in the discussion on Bethany's channel, and the other participants were all like, they were kind of waiting for something to happen. They were kind of waiting for Fitz to leave his cottage. But I was like, no, let him stay in his cottage as long as possible, because when he leaves, that's when the plot is going to start progressing. And when the plot progresses, Fitz suffers. So I really enjoyed all those quiet moments. And that's the thing about Robin Hobb's writing. Like, the story progression is very slow, and we do spend a lot of time on these kinds of mundane things, but the way that she writes everything is just so beautiful and entrancing that it just pulls you in and just makes you feel so many emotions. And one thing that I really loved about this series is that we finally see Fitz kind of have more agency in his life, because in the first trilogy, he is just this young boy and he's slowly growing up, and the plot just kind of pulls him in all these kinds of different directions, and he doesn't really have much of a say in anything. But in this series, you finally see him start to be able to make some of these decisions for himself. And also you realize how capable Fitz actually is, because again, in the first trilogy, he's just kind of like this little boy who kind of blunders around and doesn't really know what he's doing half the time. But it's really nice to see Fitz, as a grown man now and taking control of his life for once. And the second book in this series, Golden Fool, pretty much follows directly after the first book, and that's when we kind of start to see the fuller plot of this series kind of being introduced and being blown open. So needless to say, I gave both of these books 5 stars. It is my favorite of all time after all, so I can't not give it a 5 stars. And honestly, I'm probably just really biased because I love Robin Hobb's writing so much and I love her characters. The thing about Robin Hobb as well is that her plots and the way that certain stories progress and certain character relationships form is not my favorite. Like, a lot of the things that she does, I don't agree with, and I kind of have and I'm kind of just like, I wish this happened a different way, or something different happened. But even so, I think if any other author did the story like she does in here, I would absolutely hate it. But she just has this magical touch that even though I don't like where certain things go, it makes sense and I can get behind it. I can see why things happen the way they do, and so I accept it. And also, she just never does anything that's everything is wrapped up in a neat little bow and things happen exactly the way you want to. So while, sometimes it hurts a lot, I still really like the way that it's done, because it just gives you that kind of bittersweet feeling, and that's the kind of feeling that I crave when I read books. Okay, I feel like I just contradicted myself 5 times saying that, but you know what I mean, kind of. Okay, next I read Jade Shards by Fonda Lee, which is the short story collection that takes place before the Greenbone Saga. Greenbone Saga is another one of my favorite series of all time with some of my favorite characters, so I was super, super excited to read this collection of short stories. There are a total of 4 stories. The first one follows Aitmata and another character. The second one follows Lon and Andon. The third one follows Hilo and Wen, and the last one is Shay's story. So the thing that I love so much about the Greenbone Saga is the characters and the world in general. The world is just so enthralling to me, and anytime there's a question that's like what fantasy world you would want to live in, John Loon is my number one answer always. So being immersed in this world and this culture was just so great and made me so happy. And so the first story features Aitmata, who is the villain of the Greenbone saga, but I just love her as a character so much. She is so interesting and so complex and just so different from anyone else that you read. So I really enjoyed her story. I also really like the story about Lon and Andon because Andon is just my precious baby and I love him so much. And the story shows what happened when he was first brought into the family, and it's just so heartwarming to see his interactions with him and Lon, and just it was so great. Unfortunately, I did not like the next two stories as much. I love Hilo, don't get me wrong, but I was just never really on board with Hilo and Wen's relationship in the series. Like, their relationship was just kind of there in the background for me. It was nothing that I particularly rooted for or cared about. So this story didn't really do anything for me, and also it had the signature Fonda Lee explicit sex scenes that are just so uncomfortable. Like, I read spicy books, okay? Like, I love a good steamy scene in a romance, but I just feel like there's something about the way that Fonda Lee writes sex scenes that make me feel so icky, and that is exactly how I felt about this short story. So that one was a pass. And lastly, Shay, who is my favorite character of the Greenbone saga. The last story is about her. And I actually didn't really like this story that much either. It was about Shay in the past, and past Shay was very naive and made a lot of mistakes, and you see a lot of that in this short story. And I don't know, I just really didn't like the direction that it went in, and some of the things that she did were just like, it didn't really make any sense to me. So I much prefer Shay in the series itself. So overall, I still gave this book a 4 stars because I did really, really love the first 2 stories. And it's Greenbone. Just being in the world is already wonderful. Okay, next I read Tender as a Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this was some kind of book. So I picked this one up on a whim on a crisp autumn afternoon when I decided to go on a walk in my neighborhood, and I just needed something to listen to while I'm walking. And because it was October, I was like, you know what? Let me listen to something spooky. So I picked this one up. Not that this book was particularly spooky or anything. It's definitely more disgusting than scary, and I guess like that's just the kind of horror book that it was. So this book is set in a distant, not so distant future where animal meat has become poisonous to humans. So because they can't ingest animal flesh anymore, but somehow human meat is still safe, so they begin farming humans, and it becomes like this whole industry. And honestly, it was pretty fascinating to see how everything functioned in the world and all the different aspects of this industry. Like, it was definitely gross, but also surprisingly educational, because a lot of the things like they talk about is stuff that currently happens in the meat industry, like how they farm them and how they slaughter them and all that kind of stuff, which I never really knew about. So I learned a lot about that from this book. And while saying that I enjoyed it is probably not the right word, it was definitely entertaining to listen to while I was on my walk. So I mean, it did the job there. The only thing that I didn't like about this book, and it was a major aspect of the book, and I'm not going to get into it because it is spoilers, but it is something that disgusted me the most about it. And it's not even the cannibalism part. So I think that says a lot. And if you read this book, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was extremely disturbing. The ending of this book was also absolutely wild. So yeah. I gave it 4 stars though, because, you know, like I said, it did its job, it entertained me, and I feel like it succeeded in what it was doing as a horror book. And then I read Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which is another reread. And this book I first read 9 years ago, so I was due for a reread, especially because I didn't remember anything that happened in this book. So in order for me to continue on in my Cosmere journey, I felt like I had to refresh my memory on what happened in this one. So when I first read this book, I think I was giving it maybe like a 4.5 stars. I just remember loving it so much. When I read this, for like probably the first half, I was not as impressed, to be honest. I was thinking like, I remember loving this so much, like, why am I not enjoying it as much? Where is everything that I loved about it? But then the second half is where things really kick into gear, and then after I finished it, I was like, okay, right, now I remember why I loved it so much. So I still ended up giving it a 4 stars. I think one of the things that made me not love it as much as I did this time around as I did the first time is because it is one of Sanderson's earlier works, and I think you can definitely see that. So because I've read so much more of his more recent works, I've seen how he's improved as an author, as a writer. And also, there's just some things in this book that were so weird. Like, I am definitely a fan of Sanderson humor. Okay, I know a lot of people don't jive with Sanderson humor. They think it's really corny and cheesy, or he's just not funny. Like Sanderson just can't do humor. But it always really works for me. However, in this book, one character in particular, I'm sure everyone knows who I am talking about. Of course, it's Lightsong, who I like as a character, but sometimes he just needs to know when to be quiet. Like, know when to shut up. So this book is about these two sisters, Ciri and Vivenna, and Vivenna, since birth, has been raised and trained to be betrothed to the God King, which is the ruler of a neighboring but also warring kingdom. And the younger sister, Ciri, has just been kind of like cruising through life, not really having any responsibilities and just like playing around. So when it came time for Vivenna to be betrothed, Ciri ends up getting sent in her stead. So Ciri is in way over her head with all of the politics and intrigues that's happening in the other court. And meanwhile, Vivenna now is on a mission to try to save her. I really like these two sisters and their dynamics with one another, and how their character develops, how they learn from each other, but also staying true to themselves. And of course, I have to mention Nightblood, who is the best talking inanimate object of all time. Like, I always love a good talking inanimate object, and Nightblood is just the best of the best. He's a talking sword, by the way, and he is just great. And because I read this so long ago and I remembered literally nothing about the plot, I was surprised all over again by all the twists and reveals that happened in this book. And as I mentioned earlier about participating in some Cosmere read-along discussions on Elle's channel, this is the book that I participated in, and I'll link that video down below as well. Once again, it is full spoiler. Next, I read The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, which is a novella set in the Cosmere universe. And I wanted to read this one first before I progressed any further in the Cosmere, because I heard that this one has a lot of important things that's related to the wider Cosmere in general, and that is not incorrect. There's a lot of things in here that I'm glad I didn't read until now, because there are certain concepts that you don't find out about until like a little bit later in Stormlight and also the Mistborn series. So having all of that in context and then reading this made it really enjoyable and make a lot more sense. So this book is about a girl named Shai who is a forager, and she has this unique ability in this world to be able to overwrite the soul or history of an object. So for example, you have a table that's in really bad shape and has seen better days. She is able to go into the table's history and kind of see like what happened to make it become like this, and kind of convince the table that that thing didn't happen or something else happened, and it ends up changing the history of the table so that it is more magnificent. So stuff like that. And so in this book, the emperor of the land recently survived an assassination attempt that, while left his body alive, wasn't so lucky for his mind. So his advisors hire Shai to basically write him a new soul so then he can wake up again. So essentially he's going to be like a copy of his former self, but it has to be good enough to be able to convince everyone that nothing happened to him and he is still the same person that he was, and the assassination attempt was not successful. So I really like this novella because, first of all, the magic system just seems really incredible. But I also really liked Shy as a character as well. She's just so smart and resourceful, and there's parts of her character that I just really related to and really enjoyed, and also made me really sad. So I loved that. One funny thing is that when I first read Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett, I thought it was the most interesting, unique magic system ever. But then I read The Emperor's Soul, and I know this novella was written first, so it's more accurate to say that scribing is really similar to forging. But I just found it quite funny, like just how many similarities there were. I still really enjoy Foundryside regardless, but yeah. You know? So I really enjoyed this novella and gave it a 4.5 stars. And then I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which is the first book in her series called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And this one I just picked up completely on a whim. It's been on my TBR for such a long time, and I just wanted something quick and light, and I was kind of in a mystery thriller kind of mood. So this book is about a girl named Pippa who is doing her capstone project in her senior year of high school, and she is focusing on the impact of media and how it affects police investigations. And the investigation that she is focusing on for this project is surrounding a crime that recently happened in her town, where she doesn't believe that they got the correct culprit in the end. So she's kind of using this project as a mask to investigate further into this crime and trying to find the real culprit. And this book also has a lot of like interview style formats, so it has that mixed media aspect going on. And I really enjoyed this for the most part. I feel like the mystery was not like the greatest mystery, because I feel like once you've read enough mysteries, you kind of start to see the patterns in a lot of these stories. Like you see how the author tries to divert your attention from one thing and presents all these kinds of different red herrings. So I did end up guessing correctly one major aspect of the mystery. So it made like the reading experience a little bit frustrating, because I was always like, how can you not see this, Pippa? Like, stop focusing on these other things and turn your attention to this other thing. That's actually what it is. But alas, that's just how it goes when you read a mystery, I guess. But I did really like Pippa as a character, and I really liked her friends and her family and the love interest. So overall, I just really enjoyed this story for the characters, and I gave it a 4 stars. So I definitely will be continuing on with this series, and I feel like it's just a really nice palate cleanser in between all the big chunky fantasies that I read. And lastly, the final book that I will talk about, and the last book that I read in November, is Dawnshard by Brandon Sanderson, book 3.5 of the Stormlight Archive. So this is the novella that takes place between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. And again, I really liked this one too. Even though I didn't read that many things these past couple of months, I still had a really good time reading what I did, so I'm happy for that at least. And I really like this novella because one of the characters that we follow is the Lopen, who is just one of the most hilarious and entertaining delights of the Stormlight Archive, and he is just so fun to follow. It's so funny because throughout the entire Stormlight Archive, he just does so many random things and says random things that like make no sense, but because now we're getting his perspective, like it puts into context like some of the things that he usually says, and you're like, oh, okay, like so that's what that means, and that's what he means by this. And I also really like the other character that we follow as well. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I think it's Risen, I think. I really like her as a character and what she represents in this series, and I really like the overall message of this novella as well. One thing that I will say is that I feel like if anyone else had written this book, so similar to like what I said about Robin Hobb, and that's just like where my internal biases just come out a lot. If anyone else had written this book, I would definitely have been like, oh my god, this is so preachy. Like, I don't need someone else like telling me these kinds of things, like teaching me these lessons. But I feel like I'm way too forgiving when it comes to Sanderson, so I didn't mind as much. I did feel like it was a little bit preachy, but I was more okay with it because it was Sanderson, and I fully recognize that that is my own internal biases coming through. And also in this novella, you learn so much more about this world, and I just feel like the more answers we get, the more questions I have as well, and I just can't wait until all of these mysteries are solved because it is killing me not to know these answers. All right, so there we have it. Those were the 8 things that I read in October and November. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books and what you thought of them. And also real quick, I just want to address some of the things that were on my October TBR that I didn't get a chance to get to yet. So I believe in my October TBR, I mentioned I wanted to read Lightbringer by Pierce Brown, the 6th Red Rising book. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to get to Lightbringer for the rest of this year, so that will have to wait until next year. Hopefully at the beginning of next year though, so I don't forget too much of what has transpired since Dark Age. And I have also started reading The Grace of Kings, and I'm currently about a third of the way through, but I temporarily put it down to pick up some other things that were more like obligation-y kind of reads. So definitely will be continuing with The Grace of Kings and hopefully finish in December. As for what else I'm hoping to get to in December, I am currently reading The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson, the conclusion to Mistborn Era 2, so that is super exciting. It's been a long time getting here, but we're finally here. I'm also going to be doing a buddy read with a couple of friends of City of Nightmares by Rebecca Schaefer and Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. So with those books, I think that's enough of what I will say I'm committing to as my TBR for December. I always want to read a lot more, but you know, there's only so much time we have in a month, but I do have the last 1.5 weeks of this month off, so hopefully that means a lot more reading time. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in my next one. Bye!